Of every man who has ever stepped inside a spacecraft, of every man who has ever been a part of any space program, no matter the country or affiliation, only one man can make the claim as being the first man in space. That man is Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin, born on March 9, 1934, in the village of Klushino, near Gzatsk, a city that would one day carry Gagarin's name as its own. Coming from a family working in a collective farm, they would soon suffer under Nazi occupation during World War II, when Klushino was occupied during the German advance on Moscow. The family forcefully separated when its two older siblings were deported to Poland to serve as slave labor, and it would not be until the war's conclusion in 1945 that they would finally reunite, moving out of their small town and into Gzatsk, during which time Yuri began his secondary education. He would focus on apprenticeships in construction and foundry work, continuing on to study at Saratov Industrial Technical School, yet during the weekends he volunteered for training at a local flying club, where he would learn how to fly as a Soviet air cadet. Upon graduation in 1955, Gagarin was drafted into the Soviet Army, but his flight experience would find him recommended to the Soviet Air Force's pilot school in Orenburg, soloing the MiG-15 before graduation and receiving his posting assignment, achieving the rank of senior lieutenant by November of 1959, 2 years after Sputnik, and by this time well into the Soviet Union's plans to develop a manned space program. A long, exhaustive search and selection process concluded in 1960 when Gagarin found himself among 20 pilots chosen for this new secretive program. The field was narrowed down when Gagarin was named among the Sochi 6, the shortlist from which the first cosmonauts were chosen. The final selection came down to Gagarin and German Titov for the first launch, not only because of their training performance, but also height restrictions with the new Vostok spacecraft. Gagarin himself measured just 5 feet 2 inches in height. Gagarin was also quite favored within his candidate peers. When asked individually who they would vote for, other than themselves, for the first flight, all but 3 chose Gagarin, and it would be April 12, 1961 that he would make history, stepping into the Vostok 3KA-3 spacecraft and become the first ever human being to not only reach into space, but successfully orbit the Earth. This made him an instant celebrity throughout the Soviet Union and a household word across the world, though the world didn't even know about it until after he landed safely. He began an unprecedented world tour, visiting such countries as Italy, Germany, Canada, Brazil, Japan, Egypt, and Finland, and even visiting the United Kingdom 3 times, all to promote his successful flight. This took a toll, as it would on any man, but he would attend so many social functions where he was expected to consume alcoholic beverages that his sensible drinking was no longer such. He would even get caught in an affair later that year, the aftermath of his escape leaving a permanent scar above his eyebrow, something his wife would no doubt remind him of whenever she could. With the public tour dying down, Gagarin returned to work, spending 7 years working on designs for what could hopefully become a reusable spacecraft, achieving the rank of colonel by 1963. He was spaceflight royalty to everyone he served with, and this unfortunately became the biggest problem of his cosmonaut career. One could also call it John Glenn syndrome. He was so famous, so recognized, so important to spaceflight history, that they simply could not and would not risk losing him in a spaceflight accident, therefore never assigning him to an actual flight. Gagarin would, however, serve as backup for the first of the new Soyuz spacecraft in 1967, a craft that had seen nothing but failure during its tests, and there were no less than 200 faults reported with the spacecraft, which were overruled by political pressures and demands that the flight be launched on the anniversary of Lenin's birthday. Gagarin saw all of this, and it was clear to him that the Soyuz was not ready, and that it would cost the life of its pilot and his friend Vladimir Komarov. In an effort to save his life and postpone the mission, Gagarin did everything he could to declare Komarov unfit and see him bumped from the flight, knowing in his heart that if he had advanced to commander, they would rather cancel the flight than risk the life of their national hero. Komarov did not see it quite the same way. Knowing full well that the craft was a death trap, he did everything he could to ensure that he flew, and not Gagarin. Yuri saw his friend take the Soyuz 1 spacecraft into orbit and recover from the longest list of malfunctions that any mission had ever suffered at the time, only to perish at the very end when the parachutes refused to open. This would be the last time Gagarin ever came close to another spaceflight, as the next year, on March 27, 1968, the world's first man in space would meet an unfortunate end during a routine training flight in a MiG-15. Many conspiracy theories surrounded the accident for decades, but it would be the KGB itself that would investigate the accident and dismiss many of these such theories. The reports, which were declassified in 2003, indicated professional negligence on the part of the ground crews and air traffic controllers delivering outdated weather reports to the pilot. After his death, the city of Gazatsk was officially renamed to Gagarin in his honor. Even before his death, the date of his flight was commemorated in the Soviet Union as Cosmonautics Day. Since 2001, Yuri's Night is also celebrated internationally on this day. His flight was only 108 minutes, and he didn't even have physical control of his spacecraft. But it was a moment that changed the world forever. And regardless of how one may feel about the politics involved, one cannot diminish the honor that belongs to Gagarin alone. The honor of being the first human being ever to reach beyond the confines of Earth and travel into space. A man the world will never forget, whose legacy will forever mark this week in space history.